first of which is South Haven, where I grew up from the age of 4 through high school. That section is actually titled Mouth of River, which was the name given to this area by the very first settlers before it was established as a town. And then there's a section on Indiana and Iowa, a section on New York City, where I've now been living for 10 years. And like Dan said, going to be moving down to Louisiana this fall to start as an assistant professor at St. Mary. And then there's, so it's kind of going chronologically by place. I'm thinking a lot about the ways that we relate to the more than human world that we inhabit, both our human communities and animals and plants and landscape, and how we do that in a world in which many of us feel like we constantly have to move to new places, even if we really love the place where we grew up, which in my case I do. After those 3 sections, there's a shift with a poem called Blue Shift, which is a long poem in sections, which I think I'm going to read through today. And that is thinking back on my relationship to this place from a very kind of detached, or as an adult who's been all these different places and thinking about things a little differently. And then the final section is part of an experiment where I've been a poet in residence at my little tiny church on the Lower East Side of Manhattan called Trinity Lower East Side Lutheran Parish for the past 3 years. And during the Advent Christmas season, those of you with connections to like mainline Protestant or Catholic churches and traditions might know about like the liturgy and the lectionary. And the lectionary is this set of readings which over the course of 3 years you work through readings from all over the Bible, and then it restarts every 3 years. So I would incorporate images and language from each of the 4 readings assigned for a given Sunday and write a poem, and my challenge was to write it like that week about some experience that I'm having or something going on in the world or whatever else. There are a couple weeks that I skipped and I filled in later because it's kind of, it's a fast pace for me. And so the first year's worth, the first season of Advent through Christmas to Day of Epiphany is the conclusion of this book. I'm hoping to bring those in with the other 2 sections, the other 2 years' worth for my next poetry book project, maybe. That's an idea. So, I'm going to read at least a little tiny bit from each of the sections, I think. But I want to get definitely several from the South Haven section, since here we are. And there's so many people here who I care about so much from the years that I've been here. So this one is the first poem in the collection. And it actually introduces this idea of liturgy, which the book concludes with, from more of a child perspective. It's called Liturgy of Next Door. I remember when everything mystical was connected, the dark repeating to thump of car tires on the highway at night, the way they changed their rhythm nearing home, related to the raucous thumps of warped old pews as grown-ups stood before the gospel, or the random pops and clicks I'd hear sitting weekdays in the empty church next door, between notes, practicing for lessons on the boxy, upright Everett piano. No one got that one, was reference. When the power went out in the parsonage, the tall clay kerosene lamp, which I had always assumed was decoration, lit the dining room, the wide cloth wick so slowly consumed, and that fire entubed in glass might have been the same eternal flame that lived in red glass hanging left of the altar next door. My dad explained that when the candle got too low, the new was lit with the old one's flame, so that's how it could be eternal. I asked, what if when they're changing, there's a breeze? Someone left the window cracked. That, he said, and smiled, also happens. It's just a candle, John. Sometimes, sitting on a rotty log, the wind would come over from the church parking lot, down the chilly mud of the ravine, and toss my hair, and might remind me of the candle in the red glass tube, or the fluty music of the Shadowfax cassette we played at night, or the weight and lightness of the history when I first walked around the columned, busted, marbled university library in another town. I didn't name the chill I'd feel at times, my mama rocking in the living room chair, my eyes closed, sick, or Papa typing in his office next door, up the stairs, stacks of papers lying silent every step. I only know it had to do with darkness and repeating beats, with something coming home. Some of you probably saw those leaning stacks of paper. This next one, is anyone here from Church of the Epiphany in town? I wrote about you. This poem is titled Church of the Epiphany. And this was at, so that first poem was thinking back to old First English Lutheran before it was Peace Lutheran on Kalamazoo. We lived in the parsonage right next door. And the very first year I attended Central for 4th grade, I think we were still living there, and we would walk past Church of the Epiphany to get to school and back. I passed a stained glass windowed church each day, walking to Central Elementary School. Midway between the vinyl-sided white where Maddie, spaniel sentinel, would bark at all but us, front paws to windowsill, and the bricked-up edifice of school, half its corridors forbidden, fire-marshaled, home of mold, asbestos, mystery. We'd walk those halls in later years, rehearsal vagabonds from Bye Bye Birdie, Peratic, and sift through boxed-up rotary phones. This was in the boiler room. Lift transmitter, lean into receiver, take whichever one had weathered best the words of students to their parents, old ones now to dead. But by the stained glass windowed church that squatted at the corner, a 4th grade boy with sandy hair and 2 big glasses turned each day, bouncing palm-sized rubber balls, and paused sometimes at dusk to see the colors streaming long ways into the garden. A monkish statue leaned, his hand a sign that read of age, of silence, stone, and night. It was a place walking by that I didn't have any connection with. There was some kind of, power there. This one is titled What Was Precious. I remember ladybugs and sowbugs, precious as father's green coffee canteen, as mother's running shoes. I remember warty toads and worms with skin like ours, rainy days when they'd take to the walks, their bodies splayed so earnest and unheeding over concrete I could gather them by the tens, scolding them, water running in my eyes and filling up their homes. Summer nights were cicada whir, froggy peeps, traffic, and the smell of grass. Once, we're told, night-held wolves, howls of shaggy ghosts, and pigeons, orange breasts modeling a mile-long feathered cloud. I imagine the pigeons descend, tornadic, a roar of grease-beaked benediction, apocalyptic vision that I only once saw approximated by bats, funneling down the autumnal evening air to christen, unwelcomed, mother's white legs, her skirt swung, our hands raised in joy. That really happened by Indiana. A lot of bats in Indiana school. Attacked my mom. And the pigeons are not rock pigeons, but passenger pigeons. Which really would come down in those kinds of funnels sometimes when they were feeding or something, apparently. So this one is a villanelle, which is an interesting poetic form that has a lot of repetition built in. And one of the things that intrigued me about it is I love villanelles. There's some really famous ones. Do Not Go Softly Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. Because of the repetition, they can't be narrative, like they can't go anywhere. They repeat and recur, and they're kind of containing. And this feeling of almost being trapped in a loop was something that was interesting to me in relation to some of the just rural anger that has been out there and that has become a force in politics lately. And I just wanted to wrestle with that. So this is called Another Small Town Drowning. South Beach parking lot. Means more here than those nice places. Rage captivates, sorrows bore. As winter storms the banded, woolly sky, seagulls huddle gravely on the shore. On radios drone the newsmen, rich and poor, to share a summons, raise a battle cry. Rage captivates, your sorrows bore. Papers fill the glove box, strew the floor. Diesel engines idle, time to bide. Seagulls huddle gravely on the shore, and drivers drag their cigarettes or snore. The dreamers know what radio amplifies, that rage will captivate, that sorrows bore. The child who dared the pier, the wave that tore, echo through the dune grass as a sigh, where seagulls huddle, gray against the shore. The town returns each night in waves for more, dashboards lighting faces too far tried, knowing rage will captivate whom sorrows bore. The seagulls huddle gray against the shore. This one's called Retting. After the gathering, the pluck from dirt, rip of root from root. Before the breaking down, the scutch of knife against fibers hung, and before the heckle comes to comb proverbial wheat from chaff, we must rot from the inside, free the best fibers, make ready the linen. Retting is actually a part of the process of producing linen from flax, so that's what that poem is trying to describe, where you have to actually soak the stalks in water for a certain amount of time, and the inside rots out, and that's the retting part, to free the best fibers that you actually use to produce the linen. Linen comes up in the book several times. That was unplanned, but interesting. This is the one poem I'm going to read from the Indiana, Iowa section, and it's one in that section that's about South Haven. But it's about something that happened, I think, while I was in Iowa doing my MFA at Iowa State University in Ames. And in some ways it feels so quaint that it's kind of a protest poem from the Obama administration. Such a different world. But I had been following these organizers trying to push for the ceasing of the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. Remember that? And Obama did. He stopped construction, and I watched his address, and he used this hashtag/slogan that protesters had been using, that is, and it just felt like you can't possibly mean the more radical version of this that people want you to do. And anyway, you'll hear it at the end of the poem. But I was thinking about that, and anyway. It's called On the President's Announcement of Our Hashtag. The president announced we need to keep some carbon in the ground. He sounded sure, his raised and lowered index finger maybe mimicking an oil rig I've seen on my computer screen. I caught his talk, distilled at first, a single image meme, hashtagged to my cell phone's glowing face, the floating phantom of a president in light above this tiny glowing slab. Such phones are made of matter. I forget sometimes the way the world is swept for me, the oil that forms the plastic, metals heaved from mines, and heavy metals concentrated to this short-term task. I hold it here. The screen dims. It reminds me of the black obsidian we'd often find in flakes along the old ravine. We pretended that was magic too, but we really knew it made the body of the place we played. The mud's black fingernails, skeletal outcropped source of grounded mystic wonder. That stone had been there for millennia. Then we'd each lift a rock and toss it up into the clicking branches, watch it fall, gleaming along a trail the trees had altered, and catch it in our shirt-sleeve guarded hands. Later, we'd return the stones to mud. The soul of earth is black like that, I think. Obsidian and coal and oil, the bridges from molten core to surface, dinosaurs to us. We listen to our president on magic flakes we've swept from Earth's ravines. The flakes can prophesy to how we've made an end to all we'll ever dream to make. A human listening to the soil's voice might speak of moderation or love. Keep it in the ground. So I've got another climate-y poem. I've been working for the past 2 years at the Climate Museum in New York City, which is a whole other topic for another time. It's a small nonprofit museum doing just awesome work. But I first encountered them sort of in the wild in a park. The very first thing they did, like 5 or 6 years ago, was this public art installation in the parks all across the 5 boroughs of New York City, where this artist, Justin Bryce Griglia, brought these traffic, like the marquee traffic signs that can be programmed to say whatever you want them to say, and he put in these kind of subversive climate messages, some of which I'll read in the poem, just to like sort of break you out of your everyday and think in a different way about what was happening. And it would also be in the languages spoken in these different neighborhoods. So Sunset Park, Brooklyn, the 3 languages were English, English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And I don't know Mandarin, so I wasn't able to remember any of that and wouldn't be able to pronounce it anyway. So it's called Climate Signals, Sunset Park. The traffic sign flashes pointillistic messages into the sloping night. 2 boys speak softly in Spanish, sitting against the weighted base. It signals warnings. Climate change at work. Vota ecológicamente. Human agenda ahead. Clouds mirror a feeble urban glow in gray. Skyline, the distant centipede of luminescent scales, concealing mown grass, delayed autumn, soft murmurs. This is obviously the New York City section. And this is a poem that I wrote for a woman who I had begun to date at the time, less than a year, who I was already falling madly in love with, and it's titled Found in the City, to Monique.
You haven't introduced her.
This
She doesn't want to stand up.
Now we're all
That's my wife. With the feel of your lip balm, I walk through the light. Sharp distance of skyline, sun setting behind. Did we notice the foam from the Con Edison plant? The waves licking salty East River riprap? Exertions of earthworms in cold sidewalk cracks, or chill hook lifted from the homeless man's catch. We walked through the sunlight, gloved hand in gloved hand, our uneven gaits catching patterns sometimes, our voices unraveling unbalanced lines that blended or clashed as they waved through the air, impressioning softly the far skyline walls. The water, the worms, the city become a room resonant with confusion and us. We love this world so, we pour into it. The concrete below me sounds heavy with pounding. The light of your light in the air lifts it all. This is Thunder and Lilies. I'm trying to keep track of, yeah. 4:30 Thursday morning, and the atmosphere rips, shudders, and blows over the city, patters the window, booms close enough to make something in the ceiling buzz. I think again of ancestors who immigrated from Osterjotland's woods and speckled lakes, seeking better rootage, to New Sweden, state of Iowa, land of sky and grass and tar paper shacks, nothing they knew to build a home with. Imagine the heavy wetness and crash of a thunderstorm in a sod house. They took a new name, a cipher evoking a stream that flows through blue flax blossoms. Linseed cultivation was not for this new world. Grandpa Linstrom recalled the subsequent Nebraska farm, the nightly chore of irrigation. He'd lift the wooden check to loose the water from the co-op's ditch, then walk to the bottom of the cornfield to lie below the swaying stalks and stars and wait for the trickling water to reach his ears and wake him. Tonight, the sky in New York roars. Grandpa is dying in suburban Illinois, and smart people tell me we might not survive the atmospheric effects of our machines, of a kind of hunger. Could that dreaming boy beneath the stars, on a farm that ran without electric lights, have contemplated such a thing? His father would die soon after from a heart attack. He would be the one to leave for college, then seminary, and when he married in Illinois, no family from Nebraska came. I knew him as a gardener, a lover of hostas and lilies, who planted much and hopefully, who in thunderstorms would think of the rain and remind us that the plants would be glad. This is the day the machines came. We said, finally, here is some help, and for cheap. Somewhere someone had dug the graves of a bygone age and turned up the muck to racket the tractor to life. We thirsted, had no money that day. Oils forced from subterranean slumber became gold. We could bring bananas back from town, send the children to school, buy more land, send our youngest son away to college. Why didn't he return? Sunlight glinted off metal shoulders, beat less long on our backs. The earth smelled warm that day, felt still soft and inexhaustible, while the prophet asked, "Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, your labor for that which does not satisfy?" Soul thirsts, flesh faints, the soil grinds below the turning blade. We eat of new cheap calories, energy dug from deep and irreplaceable. Were we worse sinners for what we began that day? Later, we thirsted, needed money, left the land to others and fewer. We sat down to eat and drink and then rose up to play. Now someone, somewhere, exfoliates the earth to charge our little bricks. The metals and the heavy metals someone, somewhere, has ordered from the rock that hands have bled against, so we may sit to eat and play and bend above the little worlds that we have retreated to. When the screen goes black, what does it reflect? Here is help and cheap. Does this test provide a way out? We thirst, need money, dig new graves, and leave the land to play. That one's a little dark. This is the last poem in the lyric section. It's called Autumn Stridulation. Stridulation is a sound that crickets make when they rub their legs and their wings together, and it is then heard, hopefully, by a receptive female tibia, because the ear is in the leg. Anyway, that's context for this poem called Autumn Stridulation. Temperatures break, teeter-totter over the carbon axis. Outside, the black-eyed Susans stand blasted. Leaves brittle away. Coneflowers gape, droop anxious, stiffen. Today's chill hushed us where we walked. We spoke of tender things. Your hand felt slightly icy again. The yard heaves a late orthopteran harvest, each pair of wings to peg and scrape for the ear of some mate's tibia. For us, weird tune, I feel you shift and tug your sheets, you little furnace, as a tight gourd ripens just below your diaphragm. She feeds on you, your body pushes her new song to its reaping. She's out there. Cool. This is the long poem. This is Blue Shift. And it's written in sections. And one thing that's important to know, the last two sections tell a story. It's an indigenous story that had been received from the Potawatomi, from an earlier group that Simon Pokagan describes as the Mashkode. Does anyone know the name Simon Pokagan here? A few people. So, indigenous author, circa 1830 to 1899, really significant and from this region. And he wrote a pamphlet that was printed on birch bark. He did several of these really interesting material objects that are really scarce today. I tried going to the University of Michigan in Lansing to read one, and I drove all the way there, and they said, here's the transcript. What? Where is it?
State.
Okay, East Lansing.
Yeah. People get upset about these things.
Sorry. So the University of Michigan, the State Library, or sorry, no, it wasn't it was the Library of Michigan. Not, yes, that's what I meant, which I do think is in Lansing. Not affiliated with the university, sorry. And they said, here's the transcript. I didn't get to see it. But anyway, it's now available in a new edition. The library should have this, by the way. A book called As Sacred to Us, edited by Blair Marceau. It has all four of Pokagon's birch bark pamphlets transcribed for the first time. Algonquin Legends of South Haven has never been in print since 1901 in birch bark. So it's pretty cool.
What's the title again?
The book is called As Sacred to Us. Yeah. Show will buy it. After you buy this. So, Simon Pokagon, one of the characteristics of his writing is he incorporates indigenous words and will then translate them in English in parentheses. And then after he's done it a few times, especially in his longer book, Into the Woods, he'll stop giving you the translation. So he forces you to learn his language, which is cool. And I wanted to honor that in retelling the story. But he also wouldn't have spoken modern Potawatomi. One of his parents, I forget which, was Potawatomi, the other was, I think, Ottawa, and it was a very kind of multilingual household. And also he was probably speaking mostly English by the end of his life, and it seems like maybe his language deteriorated. So I'm going to use the pronunciations based on what Simon Pokagon wrote in his book Queen of the Woods for how to pronounce these words, but it's not modern Potawatomi, and I wouldn't pretend to be able to speak that anyway. And you can read about that in the notes in the end of the book. But this is titled Blue Shift, and it's in memory of Kathleen Brumbaugh, who many of you will remember. 1. The color blue cannot be found, they say, in most organic pigments. Birds encrust with sponge-like keratin their feathers, a trick to scatter light and cancel all but blue. Blue morphos' wings are similarly false. Their crushed-up scales will make a dusty brown. When you first lifted up the frames that hid my eyes, you said you never knew they were so blue, and yet this wasn't ever true. My iris pigment epithelium is likely brown as yours, but lies behind a stroma drained of nearly every kind of pigment under heaven, clear as water, filled with little shards that scatter back some tricky light, another peacock fib derived from emptiness and waves. 2. Ben was the one to go down, slipped like a proboscis under the blue skin of the big lake, and all unseen his weedy head was lost among so many shards of light dancing over Michigan. Wave crashed then, but no Ben behind, swirling universe of sand and pebbles churning, head somewhere some other part should be, eyes blink, see these stars, swish of arm, two-leg kick, fast paddle to angled sand, become treadmill, he milling under, mouth opens then because it must, ears full of grumbly, full pool noises, lost among a mother's scream and the lifeguard's whistle and legs until the sputter, sputter, cough, gasp, hack up without help. But the lifeguard walked him back anyway, and suntanned mama holding him crying, him not to swim in Lake Michigan again for 2 years, never to touch water when yellow flew. And we forgot slowly how to play in that horizon world, to splash back that tension line, the two taut blues. 3. The lake I take you to won't be the lake I knew before the baselines shifted, before the waters filled with shards. Mrs. Brumbaugh leaned one day beside the sinks and gas taps, asking 6th grade students, "Do you like that blue horizon you've seen from Blufftop, waiting for the fireworks each 4th? Do you remember, boys and girls, when viridescent stripes ran out along the pier and wrapped around your legs when wading too far out? The gentle curling of that life, when fish washed up in summers gape-eyed by the scores and all the world smelled like lakeside? The sand would carry fewer gashers then, but some year soon those shells will vanish too. Their zebra stripes won't decorate the castles every child today erects, studded with tokens of insatiability. Muscles made to swallow what they've found entangles thick throughout our Sweetwater Sea. Do you enjoy that photogenic blue? The waves that whisper every break their death? 4. The extra scatter of added miles of airy matter will daily thicken the sunset sky to red. A wide slice of blaze between the dark bands of lake effect still hours out, and the sympathetic burn of waves below. Look up. Blueness faded. The inferno of the west appears to beat a swift retreat, and slowly, straight above, the atmosphere goes clear. Your hands will tuck to sweatshirt. Your eyes will rise to stars. Somewhere there, bodies immeasurable merge immeasurably smooth, in catastrophic consequence contract, fuse, blow out, and spin. And from the pinpoint pricks of the new star's poles, where magnetic fields are weakest, shoot the beams that meet the telescopic earthling eye with the pulsar's every swift rotation. But like the lighthouse at the end of the corrugated pier, a pulsar's flashes, rushing brightness ever toward us, like every star of the galaxy we see, come red, only red, arriving only as the bodies fade away, as space itself, which we see now in brilliant blackness, expands as if in infinite inhale shocked, and all things flee from gravity. Still, supernovae merge as galactic neighborhoods grow distant. Waves lap and fizz at sand, ground earth, as if they always have. 5. Simon Pokagan, Odewadmi, wrote 2 turns of century ago on leaves of bark about the bluff we stand on now. Its name was Ishpeming, the place where Kija Manito, that great spirit, chose to set his throne. From where we know he ambled north at night, the stars alight in Chebekana, the galaxy on high, scattering the land with 7 billion stones of every color, shape, and size. No such charming stones, excepting those, could anywhere be found around all the shores of the great lake. He later planted flowers in the forest, one by one, and then returned to work the great conceptions of his soul, Kichichang, along the dune of Ishpeming. He built a bow at least 2 arrow flights in length, his mitagua, and laid it gently out along the bluff where he began to paint it. Far behind him, from the setting sun, a cyclone dropped and swept across the lake. Walsall Moen flashed across Wakwe. Anamika boomed with Tigawog, the rolling waves, reaching then the shore in the glorious painted bow. The earth shook, dunes slumped against the bow, the bluff we know, and Kijamanito smiled in the teeth of the storm. When it retreated to the darkened east, between its lingering shade and what remained of evening's crepuscular light, he blew a tearing squall to lift the painted bow, and it ascended to the place between the clouds and twilight, arrowless and empty, no string or quiver, tips in treetop glow. A bow of peace, he said, as a reminder. 6. The lake I take you to won't be the lake that swallowed Ben among a verdant throng, that Pokagon would dream of seeing lifetimes hence, Lake Michigan, the source of life and culture, waving on. This lake is blue and clear as all unpeopled sky with light, blue of emptiness, a stroma blue, bereft of pigments that it knew so long. The Potawatomi received the tale from the Ottawa, wrote Pokagon, who had learned it from the Mashkode, whom they had driven from the land 1/2 millennium ago. Nikonong, the place was named, beautiful sunset. Much farther still into the drifting past, the lake had worn its flowing dress of algae and its fish, whitefish, herring, muskellunge, and never known a zebra mussel's sharp-shelled gash. The shells themselves are growing sparse of late. The castles every child today erects in shade of Ishpeming are barer than they've been. I don't know what I want for you to see. The lake I take you to might wash into your memory, or rush in roars of shipwrecking blue. I want for you to feel the riptide in your calves, the cool below the fire, to spy the minnow's trace of lacework in the shallows, scoop of beetle back-floating away for you to save to shore, and more of power and of passing grace. But not to love the blue, my dear, the blue that hits our pupils rushing fast, that scorns the fleeing redshift stars, that comes at noon, the blue that chases faster than retreat, accusing us of our own empty sails, self-crashing blue that churns the rocks to silt and brightens every tourist's photograph, dark blue that lifts a tourist from the pier and drowns him every year, that rocks or swathes each day of death, of surf, of grief, of breath. So I'm just going to read a few poems from the last section, and then we'll have a few minutes to chat. Maybe grab a book if you haven't yet, and hang out. So, make sure I'm staying on target. The first one's called After Ida. So you'll hear like little snatches of biblical language kind of scattered and woven throughout these, but they kind of don't read as churchy poems. But they're actually read in worship at our church, which was kind of cool. This first one's called After Ida, which is a reference to Hurricane Ida, which had just kind of come through New York that year that I was doing this first cycle. Have fun with Grandma, cool. After Ida, we were confused by the roar of the sea and the waves. You left the crowd at Jamaica Center. There was no room on the platform, no trains to the city. We stayed home from work and waited. What we did not know, between us and the nearest subway stop, a woman, 45, and a man, 22, that night had drowned by the roar of the very heavens come down. Street turned river. Basement becomes seabed. Climate buried our neighbors. What we somewhat knew. Out west, fire licked trees and leaped, spiring like fig leaves in spring. Yes, the distance may have felt like distance. Oh, teach the humble your way. We are weighed down. Still we wonder what it would mean to plant a branch, grow a tree, gather the rainwater, life or death. The weather lessens. A spider huddles under a leaf of grass. It waits for the sun. This one is titled Walking Song. spelled W-A-U-L-K-I-N-G. And the poem kind of explains what that means, so just read it. Walking song. No one's ever prepared for this, my father told me, smiling. I forgot to say this first year also we were expecting the birth of our first daughter during Advent, which had a lot of nice resonance, so that's obvious from the context of this poem anyway, but walking song. No one's ever prepared for this, my father told me, smiling. I cradle in my hands your 6 months cantaloupe of a belly until she kicks. The day before he died, hospice sunken, Grandpa could barely speak. I love you so much, and don't you worry about me. Phone to ear. And somewhere in the house, the clock he built chimed in its weary, regular way. And you were in your first trimester, so he never knew. What is best? Today we unpacked new ornaments of wood and straw that we hope shall help us hang on the tree someday. So we prepare the way. We light candles. We sit in darkness and in the shadow. He was ready, I remember, my cousin said. In Scotland, I read, women sang walking songs to pace themselves as they fulled new wool, scouring with earth or fuller's soap, milling to thicken the fiber, strip the oils, strengthen the cloth. We're left here in a wilderness way, crooked and on tenterhooks, so we sing a waiting song to keep the time, and she can hear us now. We cry out to the pregnant dawn and whisper the mystery of her name. This is called Ungathered Words. In this hurling swirl, snow like wool, frost like ash, hail like breadcrumbs battering plans, who can stand? After dark, we begin to read to tiny unseen ears. Imagine them curl in like snail shells to savor with each torn word, the remnant, not knowing. Tender shoot, you'll forget the fullness of time as soon as you can see. Word and flesh, grace and truth, this great and broken company will whelm you as you gather up, trickling in your ears like another minor flood, like a watered garden. This is the last poem in the book, and it's the last poem I'm going to read. It's getting pretty late. But this is called Day of Epiphany 2021. It was written for the Day of Epiphany of 2022, thinking back here. I know there are people in this room who know what date the Day of Epiphany falls on each year, but my dad's not allowed to answer. What is the date?
January 6th.
January 6th, 2021. So this is Day of Epiphany 2021, which was revealed. Queens, New York. The laundry machines whirred and clinked. The child approached his mother and wrapped his arms around her thigh. She put her fingers through his hair, eyes fixed on the TV, where newsmen spoke in Spanish over images of the mob grotesquely pouring up those granite steps in waves and waving flags that bore the name of some false king. The fingers of her other hand touched her upper lip. In my headphones, a sober senior correspondent spoke in English of 1812, the Crown's invasion, when that dome was burnt to ash. But this king was not a king. It seemed the rot was in our very land. Darkness covered it, and thick darkness the people. I wondered if the little family at the laundry might return home to a king's cake, its plastic baby hidden from the TV, the mobbing of innocence. Perhaps they would light an extra candle. Arise, shine. In the humble business of our days, in this epiphanic conflagration, what is the plan? Millions find the plastic child and for the day become a king. May he judge the people with righteousness and the poor with justice. Each day another little king is frightened. A president seeks to unravel the slightest commission of grace, to threaten our honest routines. A scattering of neighbors mutter, shake heads, lean against particle board tables, linens piled fragrant. Lift your eyes and look around. Something has revealed itself in a humble laundromat, and we must leave for our own country by another road.
Thank you very much, John. Very emotional.
Thank you.
And he's here to answer questions, so we'll open it up, and it's great. And I would say that I mentioned the Bailey moment every Friday. Last Friday, I ran across Linstrom in the Swedish Strom, the stream that runs through the woods, creating the water pathway, like growing up in South Haven. And the Lin was from the Lindsay that you mentioned, the blue fields. And so last Friday I mentioned that to Paul Landecker, and I'm glad to hear it again from you. So anyway, I'll turn it over, and hopefully we'll see all of you Wednesday at the museum 7 o'clock for the nature study idea discussions. So, thank you. And here I have a microphone.
Well, I'm just going to stand up and holler. John,
Yes.
I've never published any poetry. When you collect your poems, were there poems that you have written and considered that didn't get published, that didn't make the book?
Didn't make the book. Yes. Yeah.
Did you ever have a publisher who said, not that one, not that one?
In regard to the book in particular, or like in journals and stuff?
In regard to your collection there.
Well, so the way that a lot of publishing works now is they want you to send a polished manuscript. So a lot of places won't accept a book unless they feel like it's ready to go. Unfortunately, the way that it often works now, this isn't true for poets unless you're really, really famous, but for novelists and memoirists, people who sell books that people buy, that make money, they'll work with an agent who becomes like their editor, like an editor of an earlier era, Perkins type of involved. So agents have kind of taken that work over. But I had a chance to change things in the manuscript after it was accepted, and I added some. And I don't think I took any out, I just added some. But I've written a lot of poems that had either never been published at all, or have only appeared in like a literary journal, and I was kind of like, I don't know. But I wanted to, there's a certain kind of length that's standard, around 70 pages or so. That's about what this is. And just themes started to emerge. I literally printed them all out on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper and just started moving them in a grid around the living room in our apartment in Queens. I think remembers the craziness of this. You start to feel a little insane. And then I started to see groups, and I started thinking about the themes of like place and belonging and movement, and that's where I got the idea of sections based on geography for the first part. Blue Shift was its own section, and then this liturgical series felt like it was responding to a lot of those threads anyway, and pulling doing. So actually those later poems, which were that liturgical cycle at the end, kind of helped shape what came before as well, and what made sense to keep in and leave out. So, yeah, and actually there's a poem, there are a couple poems that were written specifically for the book that I hadn't written previously. Most of them a lot of them I changed quite a bit. And so one of them, actually, Blue Shift, I wrote a whole new section in it because I felt like it was a reference to, well, Blue Shift is a type of movement of light. I'm not a scientist, but when an object is moving toward you and light is also coming at you, it shifts toward the blue end of the spectrum because the wavelengths are squished. And when it's moving away from you, it stretches out and it becomes red. And I wanted to get into that dichotomy because it really wasn't, there's a reference to red shift stars at the end, but otherwise it didn't really come out unless you really thought about it more than I should really expect someone to. So I wrote that, and then the poem, which is one of my favorites in the collection, Thunder and Lilies, which I read today, which is about my grandfather, like toward the end of his life, and thinking about my heritage, was written for the book and ties together a lot of things I wanted to say that I felt like were on the edges of the book. And a friend of mine had read through the manuscript and said, you know, you end that section with autumn stridulation, and it's like all of a sudden you're expecting a child that comes out kind of out of nowhere. Like Monique is introduced and there's a romantic thing happening throughout that New York section, but there's so much about climate change here, and so many young people are worried about bringing new life into the world because of overpopulation and climate change. And she was like, I just wanted a little more tension before that. This is a friend who writes and thinks a lot about climate change. So, and so this was a kind of, and I was thinking about it for a while, and like, I don't know how to do this, but then I just kept coming back to family and the importance of living forward towards something, and how for Monique and me, having a kid was it was something we wanted already, and part of how we imagined sort of that, bringing that movement forward. And so I kind of got at that tension from an angle by thinking about my grandfather and all of the challenges that people before us had faced. Living in a sod house in a new land where like your little bubble speaks your language and the rest of the area doesn't. And that thinking of, in thunderstorms, he thought of the rain and reminded us that plants would be glad. That became kind of the answer to that anxiety. So that was an example of a poem that emerged from the creation of the collection itself. And a lot of things I wasn't content with, and I changed titles, or some of them appeared in journals under a completely different title in the past. So, creating headaches for future archivists.
Your imagery is mesmerizing,
Thank you.
and I tried to listen to the sounds as well, but the caterpillar kind of pushed that out of the way. How well is your sense of Michigan, which I love and which inhabits your poetry, how does it land in New York? Which I also happen to love and where I live too,
Yeah.
but I'd like to know it from your perspective.
That's a really cool question, and I don't know if I know. We launched the book in New York at the Climate Museum, and I did a very short reading, just 15 minutes, alongside 3 other really awesome poets who each read for 10 minutes, and we did a panel and stuff. And I was wondering about that, because I read some of the Michigan stuff, and some of the New York stuff. And I read that Small Town Drowning poem, which, it's hard to talk about those kinds of things, especially with people who don't live in rural areas or haven't. And I was happy with, it seemed like everyone was really with me. I don't know. I feel like what I found living in different places is that, well, for one thing, New York City is, so many of the people you meet come from somewhere else anyway. And a lot of them come from small towns. And there's so much openness too. So many of the people I've known who have been, I mean, Monique was born and raised in New York, but other people, my friend Samira, who was a colleague of mine at the Climate Museum from Brooklyn, are so, they just know people from all over the world and seem really curious and interested in my experience and these different kinds of life stories and things. So it's been really fun to talk with more people about that kind of thing. And being in academia, I mean, you know, sometimes in the PhD program you're trying to be cool and like intellectual and it's easy to want to hide parts of yourself. Like I didn't want to talk about my faith background for a long time with my colleagues. And then I just thought, this is stupid. I'm who I am. This is part of my culture and tradition. It's not like, you know, whatever, I'm not holding it over anyone else. And then I realized, oh, nobody cares. You know? It's all like, oh yeah, that's cool. John has like 5 pastors in his family and goes to church on the Lower East Side at a really cool place that feeds the homeless. Yeah, that kind of went on a tangent there, but I feel like it's been well received. Yeah. Thanks for that question. Yeah.
John, you probably know in South Haven, the drownings that we've had. I mean, when I first read of another small town drowning, I didn't grow up here. I lived here for 24 years, but you captured a lot of what happens down on the beach, the sitting and watching, and how I found it interesting that you wrote about that, because you know everybody drives down to the beach in the evening to watch the sunset. And the town now is very emotional because of the drownings that we've had. And it's taken me a long time to realize really how devastating it. I've lived here a long time, and I'm from the east side of the state, and I just didn't know the power of that's out to the west of us. It's a powerful influence on all of us, whether we realize it or not. It's like a being out there that we know is there all the time, and I think you captured that. And I thought it's interesting that you put it in this book, because you've been around for places, but so it still is in your memory.
Yeah, and part of the inspiration for that poem was working as a beach parking enforcement officer for 2 years.
So you saw a lot of...
I remember sitting on the north side once when it was stormy and dark, and there were the red lights on the south side by the pier all day, and roped off, and it was weirdly juxtaposed. I've written about this elsewhere but not published it, but it was juxtaposed by these, what are they called, the people who hold on to the sails that are up in the sky, and kite boarders. There were these bright colored kite boarders out on the north side, and the brightness of that and the red flashing lights were so jarring. And then, yeah, I've also been thinking a lot about how it's like impossible to afford living in town anymore. You know, like most people who are trying to buy homes, who are like young adults especially, live outside of town and commute into work. And you know, but why do we want to stay here? You know, I mean, I haven't been able to, but I kind of sometimes feel bad and like wish there was some way. And that seems really embodied by the people sitting in the parking lot each night after work.
Well,
I'm
I'm married to someone who grew up on Lake Michigan, and the longer I've been married to him, I realize he will say something to me about the water. Really? I didn't, you know, just casually, he'll say, like when the boats, you can see them from here, this was because something's going on the lake and they're coming in closer so they can get to. I looked at him, I said, I've been married to you for 42 years and I've never heard you say that to me. He goes, yeah, everybody who grew up here knows that, well, you know, grew up on like,
Yeah.
it's just, it's an immense thing that I see is still in you,
Yeah.
you know,
And that's part of what, like, I'm always interested in how that impacts someone like Bailey, you know.
it did impact you because I will tell you, that you know, you just don't, it's just part of your being because you grew up here.
Yeah, yeah,
Very nice.
thanks. Yes, Mr. Stevie.
Hello, I had a question if you want to do this renting, poem renting, the last stanza. Yeah, wonderful poem. I love the last stanza. We must rot from the inside, free the best fibers and make ready the linen. I'm gonna commit to sin and ask, can you expand on that?
Yeah.
Because it's beautiful the
because
way it
it's
is, but
really-
I just wondered your other tangential thoughts on that part.
Thanks, yeah. I really love that poem. It's so teeny and condensed, so it's easy to expand on. I wrote that in my MFA, and I was thinking, so linen, coming back, I mentioned across several poems, linseed, Linstrom, just felt like a ripe metaphor for like exploring. I'm really interested in how almost all of us have like diaspora in our families. Most of us aren't indigenous North Americans, you know. And how recognizing that as a really important part of ourselves and what we inherited can help us be more empathetic to new arrivals, like newer immigrants. And so I had this idea at the time. It's like, I'm gonna write an epic poem about my last name, which my family really. I started and I was just this, I can't do this. I was experimenting. It was an MFA, but our family were Gustafsons, this is the Linstrom branch of the family before immigrating here. Didn't come through Ellis Island. It's not like somebody renamed them. This was before the Ellis Island period, mid 19th century. And we don't know why. And my grandfather, who's in a number of these poems that I read today, who passed away, my grandpa Linstrom is still with us. My grandpa Johnson is still with us. But my grandpa Linstrom was an avid genealogist, and this is one of the things that he was interested in and tried to find. And he looked for a Linstrom somewhere in Sweden. Because the other thing that many of you might know is that it's way more common to have a D in the name Linstrom. But that wouldn't make it a reference to flax, it would be the linden tree. And most people are named after the stately linden tree. But we have these kind of humble blue blossoms. But there is no river that we've ever been able to locate in historic or current records. Maybe there was a stream on the farm in Östergötland that had flax blossoms that reminded them of home. The joke in the family is that they chose Linstrom to sound less Swedish. So much for that. But
We went
That's
looking
cool.
for the Lynn in 2013 and found ourselves on the end of a little castle in a thunderstorm, but we didn't find it.
yeah, yeah. So so it's anyway. That's kind of a tangent, but I was interested in like, I knew you could make clothing from flax, but I didn't know how. So I went. This literally was like a Wikipedia rabbit hole to find out the process. And there were these different. The Wikipedia entry at the time, this was like 2012 or something, had these different steps, and one of them was retting, and that's the one where that literally rots from the inside, like I was saying. And I thought that was an interesting metaphor for that which falls away and is left behind and dies inside you, or so, and the book is partly about losing and mourning the loss of home, the loss of elders, of a recognizable climate, species. So a lot of those themes are important to what I've just been thinking about for the past 15 years. So I liked that as a final poem to the first section as I'm leaving Southampton, partly for that reason. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
I understand you're changing colleges, changing jobs. Is the new school a university? Is it a religious school? Is it, what are you going to be teaching? Why are you moving?
Well, I'm moving because I'm out of a job. I'm moving because I'm out of a job. My postdoc at the Climate Museum is a 2-year gig, so that's timing out this summer. And the job, I'm going to be an assistant professor of English at Centenary College of Louisiana in Shreveport. So it would be a change of pace from Queens. But we're excited. It's, you know, the academic job market now is so hard to get tenure track, especially in the humanities. So you pretty much have to apply nationwide. And this is part of what I mean. I sometimes talk about the phenomenon that I'm placing myself in with this book as this kind of American small-town diaspora, where I can't be a tenure-track professor of English in South Haven, like LMC doesn't do that. And even if it did, there would be 600 of us applying for the one job. But that said, I mean, these are on wheels. Yeah, that said, we're pretty excited about it. We're looking forward to a different pace. We will be able to afford, for the same price as a studio apartment in Sunset Park, Queens, a 3-bedroom house with a backyard and a nice porch that's air conditioned. So, we're really looking forward to that. Any last questions before, I know we're kind of late. So,
Thank you, John. And everybody, please join us Wednesday at the Bailey, 7 o'clock start time. And it was very informative, and I'll bring my book Wednesday and you can sign it then.
yes, you can definitely do that. We're happy
Thank
to
you.
sign books now. Thanks so much. Thanks to the library. Thanks to Lois.